Hi, I'm Rusty Nail from Grex Airbrush. I've been painting figures since 1993, and through the years I've come up with various techniques from other artists with painting skin tones, different ways of painting them, different varying techniques to achieve different types of skin tones. What we're going to be painting is a large-scale figure bust. This is a large-scale figure bust of a vampire. I chose this subject due to the nature of the subject, which is pretty much all skin tones except for the eyes and the teeth. Before we get into the actual painting of the model, I'd like to discuss paint products. What we use in figure modeling are mainly water-based acrylic paints. All these paints I will discuss have their own reducers and extenders. The first color I'd like to introduce is Cryptic Illustration Paint from the Bloodline series. This paint is heavily pigmented, which is why I like it. The downside to this paint is that it does tend to have tip dry on your airbrush needle if it is not reduced. The next color I'd like to introduce is Garage Kids color. These paints are also heavily pigmented, wide variety of colors, but again the downside is tip dry if they're not reduced. The next paint I'd like to introduce is Calm Art. Calm Art has a wide variety of colors. Calm Art sprays beautifully through the airbrush with little to no tip dry. But the downside to this is that it's very, very delicate. So unless you have a barrier between the paint and you handling it, it is liable to rub off, which is very frustrating. The next product I'd like to mention is Golden Airbrush paint. I like this paint because it is heavily pigmented. There's a huge variety of colors. It sprays beautifully through the airbrush with little to no tip dry. The downside to this paint is that it does dry glossy. So if you don't want the glossy finish on your model, then you're going to have to probably use some kind of flattening agent. This particular paint has its own extender. What I like about this extender is that it can be used with a wide variety of different manufacturers of paint. The next paint product I'd like to introduce is Flex paint. The good thing about this paint is it has a huge selection of colors, varying different shades of any one particular color in the paint line. The downside to this paint is that it will clog your airbrush, and there's a tremendous amount of tip dry if it is not greatly reduced. The last product I'd like to introduce is Grex from the Private Stock series. I really like this paint, and it flows through the airbrush very nicely with little to no tip dry. Again, this product has its own extender, which is compatible with many other different manufacturers of acrylic paint. The only downside that I can see about this product right now is that it is a new product and it has a limited range of colors. These are the paint products that I use when I paint my model kits, but there are many other quality paint products out there on the market. Now we're going to actually start priming the figure, but before we do that, I'd like to go over a few things real quick. There's two main types of primers that figure modelers use: an enamel-based primer, which is a hardy primer conducive to handling, but the downside to this primer is that it's very toxic, so it's not anything you want to spray indoors. Another type of primer that's primarily used in figure modeling is an acrylic-based primer. This is non-toxic and can be used indoors. The downside to this kind of primer is that it can come off with general handling of a figure while you're painting it. When painting your model kits, resin figures can be primed with any kind of primer. But when you're using a vinyl model kit, you want to use a lacquer-based primer, because if you don't, it will not adhere to the kit. There's several brands of primers on the market. Just to name a few: Duplicolor, Krylon, Tamiya, Garage Kids Colors, Reaper. These are just to name a few, but there are many other quality brand primers on the market. Now we're going to start priming the figure. The reason I like using an airbrush is because it allows you to get into fine, minute detail areas without obliterating the detail, such as around the eye, and then the nose, and the mouth, and the ear. The aerosol cans spray a very wide pattern, which can obliterate any kind of fine detail that you're trying to achieve. As you can see, the figure is now primed. I left some of the resin showing through the primer on purpose because this will begin to break the skin texture up, which is a desired effect. What I would do next is spray the figure with a white primer. The white primer is sprayed over the uppermost parts of the figure, which will create a halo effect. The halo effect in turn creates a highlight, and the gray primer creates a shadow. This will help map out the figure as you start your base coat. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to paint the figure with the white primer. But before I do, I want to string the white primer with some just regular sheer pantyhose. What I do is I get the pantyhose and I bring it taut around the bowl of the airbrush. I get the primer and I very carefully pour the primer onto the pantyhose. A little drop at a time. And if you pull it tight like this, it's not going to run everywhere. Sometimes you just see little flakes of paint in there and sometimes you don't, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so let's get the figure, turn it with the top of the head facing you, with the airbrush about 12 inches away or so. You just start spraying the uppermost parts of the figure in kind of a halo fashion. As you can see now, the figure is primed white and gray. All the areas are mapped out for you for your highlights and your shadows. Turn the figure around. You can see that all the high points are hit with the white and all the low points or shadows are gray. So it'll give you a good map of when you start your base coat. Now that the figure is primed, we're going to apply the base coat. Before we do the base coat, I would just like to say that I do usually mix my own flesh color with white, browns, light browns, dark browns, blues, reds, yellows, and maybe some greens. For the shadows, I would add more brown to the basic flesh mix. For the highlights, I would add some white to the basic flesh mix. But for the sake of the video and time, I'm using Grex's private stock opaque light flesh tone. So now I'm going to load my airbrush, the flesh tone, give it a little shake. Private stock has its own extender, so I'm going to add a little bit of extender to the paint. I'm also going to add just a little bit of water, plain water. The way I mix paint in the airbrush is called backflow. This is how I mix the paint inside of the airbrush without using any kind of external mixer in the airbrush. So I just cap the cup, hold my finger over the tip, and I push down for air and pull back just a little bit for paint. Now the paint is all mixed up in the airbrush bowl. There's two ways to apply the base coat. The first way is to apply the base coat in an overall even pattern over the entire figure, but not so opaque that you're covering all of the primer. You're allowing some of the primer to show through. The second method to applying the base coat, which is my preferred method, is you apply the base coat in a haphazard way, which results in a blotchy appearance, which breaks up the skin tone, which is the desired effect that I'm going for. As you can see, as I said, I'm spraying the base coat on in an uneven fashion here, which is breaking it up, which is giving a more interesting appearance to the skin tone. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull back the airbrush and I'm going to give it an overall general spray, but trying to maintain that splotchiness. Just trying to tie all this together. Now that the base coat is finished, I need to apply a protective layer. This is Testor's dull coat. I'm going to apply this in an overall even fashion. Now that I've applied the Testor's dull coat, I'm just going to use the hair dryer to speed up the drying time. Now that we're done with the base coat, we're going to begin pre-shading. Pre-shading is done to set the tone for all the upcoming shadows. Colors I'll be using are Crystal Caramel, Transparent Burnt Umber, Transparent Green. Again, I'll be using the extender with a little bit of water. Now the areas you want to concentrate when you're pre-shading is around the orbs of the eye, the nostril area, the fold of the skin here, any fold of the skin and crevices that would need shadowing, through the ear, under the chin, in the neck area here, in between the chest area, underneath the shoulder, underneath the chest here, in the back area underneath the head, the back of the head, in between the shoulder blades, and up underneath the shoulder here. Now that I'm almost done pre-shading with this color here, I'm going to do a reverse halo. I'm just going to gently tie all the pre-shading areas together that I've done. Okay, now we repeat the same process we did with the previous color, but this time we're going to be using transparent green. What I do in between colors is I just simply flush the paint out with water. But what I want to do first is I want to make sure all the previous color is out. Okay, just add some water. Use a Q-tip to clean the inside of the bowl. Open the air pressure up a little bit and just simply spray it into this container. A little bit extender to it. A little bit of water. As you can see, it's spraying fine. Now that I laid the shadows in all the other areas that I did previously, I'm going to do another reverse halo, just slightly. Now we're going to repeat this process again with burnt umber. If this was a human subject, you could stop your pre-shading right now. But since this is a vampire, we need to introduce some cool colors, like blue and purples. Okay, now I'll start adding the blue. Well, I'm pretty happy with the way it's coming along. I'm going to add a little bit of purple to just enhance the shadows just a little bit. Now that the pre-shading is done, we're going to move on to the pre-highlighting. color I'm going to be using for the pre-highlighting is the base color, the opaque light flesh tone, and I'm going to add a little bit of white to it. Turn down my pressure a little bit. What we're going for on this pre-highlighting is we're just hitting the high spots of the figure here. We're really concentrating on just the high spots. Tip of the nose, top of the cheek, this part right here, top of the head. Along the temple line here. Top of the shoulders. Chest here. So with this pre-highlighting, I'm going to do another halo effect here. So I think that'll do it. Now that we've finished with our pre-shading and pre-highlighting, I'd like to move on into spattering. Spattering is just another tool that adds texture to the skin, which creates more depth. The colors we'll be using for the shadow areas are purple and blue. For the highlight areas, caramel and transparent brown ochre. Okay, we're just going to add some blue to the airbrush. Along with some water just to thin it down. A little backflush to mix it up. To achieve the spatter effect, you need to turn down your air pressure to 3 to 5 psi, and the pattern depends on the trigger pull. When you think you have everything set up, the pattern should resemble this. Now let's begin. Where you want to apply this spatter pattern is just in the general shadow areas. You don't have to be too specific at this point. Now that we have the first shadow spatter areas, I'm just going to do a general spray just to tie all the areas together real quick. Open up the airbrush, open up the air pressure, and you just do a general spray just to tie it all together. water. Again, open it back up, do a general wash. That's spattering of the shadow area. Now we're going to do the spattering of the highlight areas. The first color will be caramel. You can barely see this, but you do want to be subtle with this spattering because you don't want it to overpower anything that you've done. So if it looks like you barely can't see it, the more transitions that you put on there, the better it will be. Okay, I'm going to open the airbrush back up and we're going to do a halo over that, just to tie it all together. Very lightly. Okay, with this ochre, I'm going to hit the highlight areas again, but just not the very top of the highlights. Okay, once again, I'm going to open it back up, do a little bit of a halo, tie everything back together. Now that we're done with the spattering of the highlight and shadow areas, I'm just going to spray a transition layer. A transition layer is just basically a wash of the base coat that's watered down. Now we're done with the transition layer. I think it's looking pretty good so far. The transition layer just ties everything together that we've done so far, including the spatter. It makes all the techniques that we've done sink down into the skin instead of look like it's floating there on the surface. The next technique we're going to do is modeling. In essence, modeling is just drawing noodles or figure eights over the model. This is what modeling should look like. The colors I'll be using for the shadow areas are some of the same colors I've used before. Blue, purple, but I'll be adding a burnt umber. For the highlight areas, I'll be using light flesh with white, but I'll be adding a light pink to the highlight areas. Okay, we're going to start painting the shadow areas. I'm going to start out with the blue. A little bit of water. Mix it up using the backflow. Just to mention before I start, this is a tighter technique, which is in more specific areas of the shadow. Just a quick note, as you can see, it's very transparent. That's the effect that you want. You don't want to overpower the shadows with this. You're just enhancing the shadow areas with this technique. Alright, now as before, I'm just going to pull back a little bit and do a quick transition to tie all this area together. Open my pressure up a little bit. Now we're going to add some purple. Okay, once again, we're going to do a little bit of a transition, not much, just to tie it all together. Be very careful not to get too much, but these paints are thinned down super thin, so but you can still get too much if you don't watch it. Okay, now we're just going to continue with the burnt umber. To mention this time, just make sure that when you are applying the shadows this time, you're just getting into the deepest folds of the shadow areas. Areas like this right here on the neck. Very prominent shadow area. And here in the ears. And remember, just for this color, burnt umber, it's really just for the deepest shadow areas. You just really want to concentrate this color in those areas. This back area, behind the ears. A little bit underneath here of the head. Near the chin here. Maybe a little bit more in the eye area. And that's really where you would really want to concentrate the most with this burnt umber. Again, we're going to pull back a little bit and we're going to do a quick wash, area. Now we're done with all the shadow areas. For highlight colors, I'll just be adding pink and white. I won't be switching out any colors. When you add the pink, just add just a tad of pink, not much. A little bit of water. When you're adding the highlights, first you're getting tight with the highlights over prominent areas of the figure, cheeks, the eye, above the eye, the eyebrow, the forehead. The nose, concentrating on the nose, tip of the nose, up the bridge of the nose, right here in this cheek area. These areas of the cheek that are coming down. Tip of the chin here. Tops of the shoulders. And as you can see, since this is a lighter color, you can see it a little better. Now at this stage, I'm going to open it up just a little bit, and I'm going to do a little broader doodling pattern over the top of the head here, over the main parts of the shoulder, tops of the shoulder. And I'll go ahead and do some on the chest here too. Once again, open it up, and I'm going to do a little transition layer to tie all this together too. The final technique we'll be covering is veining. All veining really is like the other techniques. It's just a way to break up the skin tone and add more interesting effects to the skin. Colors I'll be using for veining are red, which is for the deeper veins, gray, which are for more of the surface veins, and since this figure has actual sculpted veins, raised veins, I'll be using blue. I'm going to go ahead and load up my airbrush, the red, let me show you the technique that I use for veining. The most common areas that I add the veins are around the chest area, maybe here on the shoulder. Up from the back here. This is the technique you don't want to get carried away with. You're You're just adding some veins for different variations here for the skin. And as you come up to some areas that are lighter in flesh, this is where you particularly want to be careful not to overdo it. Maybe a few around the face. At this point, just kind of stand back and look. Maybe where you want to add a few more. I think that's pretty good for the red. Now I'm going to add the gray for more of the surface veins. These won't be as prominent, so you won't see these as much. With the surface veins, you can crisscross the deeper veins, the red veins that you already have on there. And again, these are a little more broader veins. These veins, you can just follow the contour of the body. They're a little bulkier, bigger. Again, they're not going to be very visible. With the surface veins, these are a little broader area veins where it's more over the surface of the skin, but they can cross over the deeper veins. And this is kind of what you want anyway. And you're just suggesting the vein, you're not trying to make them too dark. Now we have the deeper veins, and now we just finished doing the surface vein. Now we're going to be doing the raised veins of the figure. For this, I'm going to be using the blue. Be sure when you paint the raised veins that you don't go too dark, that it is pretty transparent. All you're doing is following the contour of the vein. Now the veining is all complete. As you can see, the veins are present, but they are not overpowering the flesh tones. At this point would be a good time to reassess the figure for any areas that need to be touched up, such as the shadow and the highlight areas. If you do need to touch up these areas, make sure the paint is really transparent. Now we've come to the final step of the airbrushing process. We're going to do a final transition layer for the highlights using the light flesh tone. and the final transition layer for the shadows using the burnt umber. I'll start out using the burnt umber for the shadow areas. One thing to mention for this, it is very transparent, very watered down. You don't want this. This is just the final transition layer. You're just tying all of these areas, shadow areas together. So like before, you tilt it away from you, shadow area is facing you, and you just do a broad spray pattern. We're going to move on into highlight. This time you're going to tilt it towards you with the top of the head facing you, the shoulders facing you, and it's the same process. Now we're done with the final transition layers for the highlights and the shadows. We're now done with the airbrushing process. At this point, you can go in with a fine tip brush. You can paint the eyes, the teeth, and the gum. You can do some final detail work around the wrinkles and the ear. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy learning about the various techniques I use to achieve my translucent skin effects.